Okay, 2025 preview. Now, usually this is just me rambling on for 15 to 20 minutes about the events that may or eventually may not happen next year. But this year I decided to try to make it more interesting. After my solo part of 15 to 20 minutes is done, there'll be about 30 minutes of a mini roundtable with two other space investors. I hope you're as excited about that as I am. But first, the usual part, and starting as usual with some caveats. So just repeating the obvious, this is a preview of 2025, not a review. Forward-looking, not backward-looking. That means it's prone to error because it's partly about judgment and forecasting. But I hope that also makes it more interesting. 2024 is done, well, almost done, and in the books. If you want a review, there are plenty out there, and frankly these days, you can just go and ask your favorite large language model. Second caveat, I just can't cover everything. The following are just some highlights. And that, in a way, is a good message. There's just too much going on in the space sector now to fit it all into one episode. I know some of you listening are also actually space entrepreneurs, and your most exciting 2025 events are your 2025 milestones. And that is exactly the way it should be, and I wish you Godspeed on those milestones. Sorry if I'm not covering them explicitly here. If you think they are super interesting for our listeners to hear about, please just reach out to the Space Business Podcast and apply to be a guest for an episode. Lastly, all of the following is woefully underrepresenting things going on in China. That I think is actually true for a lot of space reporting in general, and there are several reasons for that. In any event, I promise you we'll try to at least partially fix that in 2025 and bring on some China space experts. So let's run through the annual preview by major categories as usual, but also in no particular order. I forgot one more thing. I will try to do something new while I run through the preview events. If a specific event had already been on the 2024 preview, so last year's, I will briefly mention that. I think that's useful for listeners new to the space sector as a reminder that space is hard and timetables can be ambitious and frequently slip. But let's go. Launch, or rockets. Let's start with the 800-pound gorilla in the launch sector, SpaceX's Starship. Many will say that it is, and has been for a while now, the most interesting thing to watch in the space sector, period. Starship test flights will of course continue in 2025, and we are likely to see some interesting mission objectives, of which I'd argue in-orbit propellant transfer will be one of the most important ones. That is when SpaceX will try to refuel a Starship using other Starships acting as tankers in Earth orbit. Why is that so important? Because it opens up using Starship beyond Earth orbit, for example to the Moon, and of course eventually also to Mars. For those listeners new to the space sector, quick reminder why Starship is so important, beyond what I just mentioned about the Moon and Mars. It's a huge, bigger than the Saturn V moon rocket, and fully reusable vehicle that could bring down the cost of going to space another order of magnitude, or even more. Starship's next test flight, number 7, is currently expected for sometime in January. I can't wait. Starship is not the only huge rocket poised to fly soon, though. Blue Origin, Jeff Bezos' space company, has its New Glenn rocket on the pad at Launch Complex 36 at the US Space Force Cape Canaveral station right now. It's the 23rd of December today, and this launch could still happen this year, actually. New Glenn is a partially reusable rocket with 45 metric tons of payload capacity to a low Earth orbit or LEO. It's significant as it should also contribute to increased capacity to access space at low cost and provide a viable alternative to SpaceX's rockets. Now, that first New Glenn flight, dubbed NG-1, will also carry a pathfinder of the so-called Blue Ring, which is said to be Blue Origin's in-space vehicle that will be able to maneuver around orbits. Blue Ring has a number of potential use cases, but one could be as a so-called OTV, or orbital transfer vehicle, that can deploy a range of customer satellites at various locations in space. Now, I personally expect we may see New Glenn eventually offer a so-called rideshare service in which many customer satellites are pooled in one launch, similar to what SpaceX is already doing, and getting deployed by Blue Ring. That would mean even more competition for smaller dedicated launches, to which we'll get in a minute. Rocket Lab's new Neutron rocket was on our 2024 preview list, but the launch slipped into 2025. Neutron is a partially reusable methane-fueled rocket with between 8 to 15 metric tons of payload capacity to a low Earth orbit, depending on the reusability configuration of a particular mission. Neutron will be a clear competitor to SpaceX's current Falcon 9 rockets. We'll have also a number of commercial smaller launches trying for maiden launches in 2025. All of the following were already on the 2024 list, in no particular order. German ISA Aerospace with its Spectrum, roughly 1 metric ton to LEO payload capacity vehicle from the Andøya spaceport in northern Norway. Also, German RFA or Rocket Factory Augsburg with its RFA-1 rocket. It's also a roughly 1 metric ton payload rocket, and it will launch from the Zaxaward spaceport in the Shetland Islands. RFA was really trying to launch in 2024, but had its first stage explode and burn during a static fire test in August 2024. Orbex from the UK may try to launch its Prime rocket with 180 kilograms capacity, also from the Zaxaward spaceport. That is a change from previous plans to launch from the Sutherland spaceport in northern Scotland. Skyrora, also from the UK, was on the 2024 list with its XL rocket, but now first plans to launch a suborbital rocket in the spring of 2025. In India, we have two companies that may try for orbital launches in 2025. Agnikul with its 300 kilogram payload capacity Agni-Ban rocket, and Skyroot with its similar size Vikram. Both companies already had successful suborbital launches. In Australia, Gilmore Space may launch its hybrid Eris rocket, yet another rocket with around 300 kilograms payload capacity to LEO from Queensland. They recently received their launch permit. In the United States, there are a few other interesting things going on with launches besides Starship and New Glenn. Back from the almost dead, Astra Space was delisted from the stock exchange and taken private in 2024, secured a $44 million contract from the Defense Innovation Unit, DIU, and may try to finally launch its Rocket 4, a 600 kilogram payload vehicle, in 2025. Last year, we also learned that ABL Space in the US, who were previously on the list to try for an orbital launch, announced a pivot to focus on missiles rather than orbital rockets. Relativity Space was not expected to launch its big Terran R rocket till 2026, but there have been recent rumors about the financial situation of the company, so we will keep an eye on that. And we should also keep an eye on what may happen with ULA, or United Launch Alliance, the rocket company that has been put up for sale. Let's continue with large-scale space hardware, from rockets to space stations. So speaking of keeping an eye on companies which had rumors about their financial situation, that is also the case with Axiom, the American company building a private attachment to the International Space Station, among other things. And in 2025, NASA may kick off the bidding process for phase 2 of its CLD, or Commercial LEO Destinations program, which is the program intended to find private space stations to substitute the International Space Station. As a reminder, Phase 1 of CLD was won by the Starlab Consortium, the Orbital Reef Consortium, and Northrop Grumman. The latter has since dropped out of the program. VAST, another US company, has its Haven 1 station expected to launch no earlier than August 2025, albeit that may slip into 2026. On to satellite communications. We shall keep an eye on the growth of SpaceX's Starlink satellite communications system, which has shown impressive subscriber growth to over 4 million subscribers as of September 2024. They are also preparing to start beta testing direct-to-cell phone satellite service with T-Mobile in early 2025. And they have been signing up more and more airline customers. We'll watch all of this momentum in 2025, with one key question also being as to when SpaceX may decide that the time is right to publicly list Starlink on the stock exchange. We will come back to that in a few minutes. We will also watch the deployment of the other big planned satcom constellation, Amazon's Project Kuiper. And we already mentioned direct-to-cellular service by satellites in the context of Starlink, but we will watch this market, generally called D2D, direct-to-device in general. Earth observation. Some of the things I will watch in the Earth observation sector. Early results from the hyperspectral satellites that are now being increasingly deployed. Planet launched its first Tanager-1, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing this correctly, hyperspectral satellite in August 2024. And Indian company Pixel expects to launch 6 hyperspectral satellites during 2025. Now, another question is, will there be anything interesting we hear about in-space processing of Earth observation data, especially given that hyperspectral satellites further significantly increase the amount of data being generated in orbit? Will there be further consolidation in the Earth observation sector, whether vertical, that is upstream combining with downstream, or horizontal? And will the trend of sovereign nations planning and deploying their own Earth observation constellations continue? And who will be the next such nations? Let's switch gears and go to the moon. Well, by now, probably almost everyone already knows that the big lunar event, the next Artemis mission, got bumped from 2025 to 2026. We actually had it on the 2024 list, albeit I prudently caveated it may slip into 2025. Oh well, as I said, space is hard. As a reminder, Artemis 2 will be a crewed circumlunar flight, so no landing, but we'll have to wait a little longer for it now, due to issues with the heat shield of the Orion crew capsule. Blue Origin is expected to launch its Mk1 mission, a demo mission for the company's Blue Moon Mark 1 lunar cargo lander. It'll launch on Blue Origin's New Glenn rocket. So you obviously notice a dependency here, since that rocket needs to launch first, as we just previously discussed. Next, let's briefly mention 3 other US companies which are all part of NASA's Commercial Lunar Payload Services, or CLPS program. Firefly's Blue Ghost lunar lander was already on the 2024 list. It's now scheduled to launch in January 2025 and deliver 10 NASA payloads to the lunar surface about 45 days later. Astrobotic, another US company, is expected to launch its Griffin lander on a SpaceX Falcon Heavy rocket. The Griffin 1 mission was originally supposed to carry the NASA Viper rover, but that one was cancelled. It'll still carry Astrobotic's own Cube rover, as well as a number of other payloads. And Intuitive Machines, yet another US company, logged a largely successful moon landing already in 2024 and will likely launch its IM-2 mission in early 2025. Not landing on the moon, but still interesting, is NASA's Lunar Trailblazer, an orbiter designed to detect and map water on the lunar surface. It is expected to launch in January 2025. Outside of the US, iSpace, the Japanese company that failed on its first lunar landing attempt, will try again with its Hakuto R Mission 2, expected to launch no earlier than January 2025. Let's now briefly talk about human spaceflight. Just a few things to mention here. One question on many people's minds is, when will astronauts Butch Wilmore and Suni Williams return from the International Space Station? As a reminder, they got to the ISS on the first crewed flight of Boeing's Starliner capsule, but subsequently NASA decided they should not return on that vehicle due to some issues. So now they got an unplanned extended stay on the ISS and are waiting to come back. Axiom's AX-4 mission will launch no earlier than April 2025 and will carry Commander Peggy Whitson, as well as astronauts from India, Poland, and Hungary. And I'm sure Blue Origin will continue its suborbital New Shepard flights. And lastly, there is stratospheric balloon company Space Perspective, who aim to offer a different type of experience by taking passengers up to 120,000 feet to see the Earth from that altitude. They had a very successful test flight of the balloon and capsule in 2024, and we will be watching out for further test flights. Those of you who know me or have heard me speak about the topic know that I'm very bullish on in-space manufacturing. And there are a number of potentially relevant events coming up in 2025. First up, American startup Vada Space, which has already flown its capsule for in-space manufacturing to space once, and eventually, after some regulatory delays, successfully returned it to Earth. Vada plans to fly its W2 mission, its second mission, in the first quarter of 2025 and may fly again still in 2025. However, that is by far not the only space vehicle that could serve as an in-space manufacturing platform, which plans to fly in 2025. The maiden flight of Sierra Space's Dream Chaser spaceplane was already on our 2024 list. It may now launch on a Vulcan rocket no earlier than May 2025, a mission on which it is supposed to deliver around 8,000 pounds of cargo to the International Space Station in its main function as an ISS resupply vehicle. The Europeans also have reusable space vehicles looking to fly in 2025. First, there is the Space Rider, which has also faced delays and is now supposed to launch on top of a European Vega C rocket in the third quarter of 2025. Second, the Exploration Company from Germany, which had raised a record €160 million financing round recently is looking to fly a subscale demonstrator of its Nix space capsule in mid-2025 with up to 300 kilograms of customer payload. And third, another German space startup, Atmos Space Cargo, is looking to fly its reusable capsule demonstrator for the first time during next year. Okay, that's it for commercial space subsectors, which I explicitly wanted to cover, talking about specific events. However, there are also some themes I will keep an eye on, that commercial space themes, that is, that I will keep an eye on, that I think are worth mentioning even without specific events. These are, first, in-space computing, including maybe even data centers. The ever-increasing amount of data being produced in space is just one reason to watch this. Another is that the first companies in this area have now started receiving funding. Second, VLEO, or Very Low Earth Orbit. Operating satellites in such orbits has been talked about for a while, but anecdotally, it now keeps popping up more and more in conversations, and startups are getting funding. VLEO operations are technologically challenging, but have a range of interesting use cases spanning Earth observation, satellite communications, and space situational awareness. And I'll be watching this theme. Lastly, hypersonics, or vehicles operating in excess of Mach 5 velocity, so more than 5 times the speed of sound. This is mostly about defense use cases, as you can imagine. There's a lot of interest in this tech for geopolitical reasons, and it's worth watching, I think. Let's now talk about science missions. NASA's ESCAPADE mission was supposed to launch in 2024, but we are now looking at no earlier than spring 2025. It'll send twin orbiters to Mars to study its magnetosphere. Our 2024 preview also had Rocket Lab's private mission to Venus, the Venus Life Finder, but its launch eventually slipped into early 2025. Some other science missions in 2025, and I'm probably forgetting some. NASA's PUNCH, that is the polarimeter to unify the corona and heliosphere. Don't you love space acronyms? PUNCH's mission is to better understand how the mass and energy of the sun's corona become the solar wind that fills the solar system by operating 4 suitcase-sized satellites working together. It's supposed to launch in spring 2025. Then there's the NASA IMAP mission. Yes, another acronym. IMAP stands for Interstellar Mapping and Acceleration Probe, and will investigate the acceleration of energetic particles and interaction of the solar wind with the local interstellar medium, expected to launch no earlier than September 2025. Next up, NASA's SPHERE-X Space Observatory. You guessed it, it's another acronym. SPHERE-X is the spectrophotometer for the history of the universe, epoch of re-ionization, and ISIS Explorer. Wow, that's a mouthful. SPHERE-X will provide the first all-sky spectral survey collecting data on more than 450 million galaxies, along with more than 100 million stars in the Milky Way, in order to explore the origins of the universe. Cool. It is expected to launch in late February next year. Outside the United States, we may see the launch of a very interesting mission from China, Tianwen-2, and it aims to collect samples from a near-Earth asteroid and then continue onwards to observe a main belt comet. As usual, we have a section in the annual preview about government topics. So here goes. I'm guessing myself and pretty much almost everyone in the space sector will watch the incoming US administration's stance on and specific actions with regard to the space sector. As a reminder, among other things, President Trump, during his first term, re-established the National Space Council and also established the United States Space Force as a military branch. If you go to the Republican Party 2024 platform document, you will find the following paragraph on space, and I quote, "Under Republican leadership, the United States will create a robust manufacturing industry in near-Earth orbit, send American astronauts back to the moon and onward to Mars, and enhance partnerships with the rapidly expanding commercial space sector to revolutionize our ability to access, live in, and develop assets in space." That's good talk, I think. Let's see whether the walk follows. Now, hopes for a favorable US government stance towards commercial space are of course also high, as Elon Musk will be very close to the new administration, acting as co-head of the new Department of Government Efficiency, or the DOGE. Furthermore, Jared Isaacman, the entrepreneur who has already flown to space twice and among other things conducted the first ever private spacewalk, is nominated to become the new NASA administrator. He of course needs to be confirmed by the US Senate in that role. That then brings up the question of what changes may happen at NASA and with NASA programs, including the Artemis Lunar program and the launch system currently used for Artemis, the SLS, or Space Launch System. And that's just domestic stuff in the US, but the effects of the Trump administration with regard to space are obviously likely to reverberate around the globe. For example, I will watch how the US continues to cooperate on space with other countries, such as India and Japan, among others. I will also watch how the Trump administration's policies may impact defense spending in other countries, including, for example, in Europe, since, let's face it, any increase in defense spending anywhere these days is typically good for the space sector. Now, beyond the US administration, some other things I will keep my eye on in 2025 include any further developments with regard to space in the Middle East, specifically in Saudi Arabia and in the UAE, and in Europe, the European Space Agency, or ESA, Council at Ministerial Level meeting in November 2025. This so-called ministerial, taking place every 3 years, is the highest level decision-making meeting of ESA and decides on key European space projects and budgets. Now, let's talk about finance, funding, investments, money stuff. A couple of things I had already mentioned. For me, arguably, the most important question here is whether we will see any movement on a potential listing of SpaceX's Starlink satellite communications business on the stock exchange. Why is that so important to me? Beyond providing SpaceX with more liquidity, it would allow many people who have a lot of paper gains in SpaceX to start realizing some of those gains. And then some of that money, some of those gains, I personally hope, would then be recycled back by those investors into the space sector, that is, investing into other things in space. Now, besides Starlink and the Starlink IPO, it will be interesting to see whether the stock market will open again for space companies. I'm specifically talking about the US stock market here, as we actually have seen space IPOs in other places, notably in Japan, including recently with the listing of Japanese space company Synspective. In the US, though, the failed so-called SPAC deals of a few years ago had pretty much soured investors' appetite for public market investments in space. Things are starting to look different now, though. Publicly listed space companies like Rocket Lab and AST Space Mobile had stellar, pun intended, share price performances during 2024. And again, a Starlink IPO may help investor sentiment in general. As a first tangible example of the next US space company potentially to be listed, US company Common Space and Defense was very recently rumored to explore strategic options, including an IPO and initial public offering. I also already mentioned the ongoing sale process of ULA, United Launch Alliance. And potential buyers of ULA include Blue Origin, Sierra Space, and I suspect some private equity firms as well. I guess we'll find out the outcome in 2025. Beyond ULA and its sale process, we will watch out for other M&A, mergers and acquisition deals in the space sector. I expect consolidation to continue. Let's finish up on space events in 2025. There are way too many space events going on by now to talk about all of them, so I'll just mention a few. As usual, the year will kick off with SpaceCom in Orlando, the European Space Conference in Brussels, and also the Israeli Space Week, all taking place in late January. Shortly thereafter, in early February, we'll have the SmallSat Symposium in Mountain View, California. Also in February, on the other side of the world, GSTCE, the big space conference in Singapore, will take place. March will bring us Satellite in DC. Then there'll be Space Symposium in April in Colorado Springs, Space Tech Expo Long Beach in June, the India Space Congress in New Delhi, also in June. The International Space University, or ISU, will have its annual Space Studies program from late June to late August this year to be held in Seoul, South Korea. Now, this is an educational program, not a conference, and you have to apply for it, but you can still do so. In August, as usual, we have the popular SmallSat conference. Now, if you're in the space sector, you know that used to mean making it to Logan, Utah, and praying you'll find a hotel room or Airbnb. Well, in 2025, it will be the first year this conference will take place in its new location in Salt Lake City. The biggest annual space conference, the International Astronautical Congress, or IAC, will be held in Sydney, Australia this year, from late September to early October. And late October, we'll have Silicon Valley Space Week. In 2025, we'll finish with events including Space Tech Expo Europe in Bremen, the Dubai Air Show, and New Space Europe in Luxembourg, all in November or December. And that's a wrap for my 2025 preview for the space sector. Lastly, let me repeat something I said for the last 2 years. I'm more excited about space than ever. even more so than last year, among other reasons due to Starship becoming more and more tangible and due to the incoming US administration likely being very supportive of the commercial space sector. Time to build and invest in space, I believe, is now. If you believe that too and you're new to the space sector, there are now fortunately quite a few resources around that you can make use of. I just talked about all of the events you can go to, or some of the events you can go to. There's a range of educational programs, both in person, like the ISU program I mentioned a few minutes ago, and also online, including some of my own courses. This very podcast you're listening to right now has around 130 other episodes, some of which you may find useful to educate yourselves about what's going on in the space sector. Again, the time to build and invest in space is now. Let's fucking go. Happy holidays, happy 2025. And now please do stick around for my mini roundtable with 2 other space investors. All right, now as I promised, on to the fun part that is different from the annual previews in the previous years, which was just me talking and rambling for 20 minutes. I actually invited 2 guests to, so to say, shoot the shit on what's going to happen, what may happen in 2025. I'm really happy to have them here. It's briefly introduce them, ladies first. It's Alexandra Vidyuk, and she wears a few hats in the space sector. She is the CEO of Beyond Earth Technologies, which is a space investment firm. And she is also a venture partner at a deep tech investment firm called Lonic. And last but not least, she is one of the co-founders of Space Ambition, which is a really popular space-focused blog on Substack that I encourage you all to check out if you don't know it yet. And then we also have Faraz Khan from Giant Step Ventures, which is a US-based deep tech VC firm, which has made quite a few high-profile space investments. And I've been with both of you just a few days ago in Singapore, and this is when we came up with this idea. And I'm really happy to have you here at short notice. So thank you and welcome.
Thanks for having us today.
Okay, so let's jump right in. So 2025, what are you guys excited about in space? Ladies first, maybe.
Ladies first.
Yes, sure. No, I think it's a great year. I think for us, for the industry, for everyone, we are super excited. I think a lot of things happening in the US, and I mean, like probably mentioning just general like sentiment across the crowd, which I'm working with. You know, more capital expected, more bold movements expected, more market movements expected. I think obviously having Elon in the White House and, you know, generally like, you know, potential changes at NASA, US is probably definitely the place to be, and we're happy to kind of be part of this developing ecosystem. And on a high level, I think we definitely it's a year to build as well, not just to invest, but also to build. So super exciting.
Faraz?
Yeah, I definitely have to agree with Alexandra. And, you know, having Elon in the White House, Starship coming online, you have, you know, Varda that came in earlier this year. So next year, Varda has, you know, 3 to 4 launches planned. So, you know, continuing the commercial revolution in space, proving out that there's a need for Starship. I think there's going to be so much interesting activity to look forward to in 2025, including CLDs and all the other fun stuff.
And just for our listeners who may not know, so CLDs, commercial LEO destinations. So we're talking here about the NASA program to basically to replace the International Space Station when that goes out of service sometime in the 2030s. And yeah, I guess I should add my own view, and I totally agree with you both. I think, I mean, you know, we're talking about a book here, we're a US domiciled fund. We love what's happening in the US. We're super excited about that. We think there's going to be a lot of support for the commercial space sector, top down, from, like, as Alexandra said, from the White House down. I guess we all expect to see Jared Isaacman confirmed. I mean, by US law, he has to be confirmed as the NASA administrator, but there really seems to be bipartisan Congress that this will happen. And he's obviously a very successful entrepreneur. So we all think this is going to be very cool for the commercial space sector, and super excited about Starship, CLD, and the various things you guys mentioned. So that sounds, wow, this all sounds like roses, like really optimistic. Is there anything you guys are watching that you maybe with a bit more of concern, something to keep an eye on, or like, I don't know, potential risks?
You know, I do see some consolidation maybe happening in the launcher space. There's a lot of smaller players that are non-US that are coming up. I won't name names, but I do think that there may be some consolidation there. You do have some other rapid launch capabilities, you know, that are coming online that are very different from just your typical rockets. So kind of looking at the industry and seeing that there is going to be people that are going to try and compete with SpaceX on launch and try to ride the wave of lower launch costs and try to compete in that with various, whatever tools they can do, outside of creating a rocket to do so.
And for us, so you're mentioning consolidation, but do you think we're also just going to see some companies go out of business as, kind of happens in early stage venture?
It could happen. I think there's, the macros are really high. You have, stock indexes trading at all-time highs. If you see macros and volatility, kind of shifting and changing, then that might put a little bit of a crimp on VC dollars being deployed. And so people might be a little bit more careful. So if you have companies that overvalued, VCs might look at that and say, you went in a little bit too high, and the macros have corrected. We think we might be able to find something different at a better price elsewhere.
Alexandra?
Yeah, I think probably I would mention risk of like space debris. Obviously, everyone has been talking about it for several years. I think we have a number of good technologies. We just published an article last Friday about like the overview, right? What's happening. I think it's a risk, right, as well, but also it's an opportunity. Like, I mean, I really hope to see some, regulation coming up, more technology, more intergovernment projects or programs, kind of more bigger like programs in that space, and also maybe new startups launching in that space and developing as well.
Yeah, no, I agree with both of you. And then so from my perspective, yeah, I agree with what both of you guys have mentioned. And I'm sort of perennially, let's phrase it like this, paranoid about somebody doing something stupid on the space investment side. And this could be entrepreneurs and or investors. So for the people who remember Theranos, the biotech startup that turned out to be basically a scam, sort of like blood testing. I'm just perennially paranoid we have something like this in the space sector. And I think we all agree we're just coming out of the low of sort of like, sort of more pessimist stance on space investing after the bubble, the SPAC-fueled bubble of 2021. And I hope we're not going to have something that's going to kill off the young shoots, so to say, because someone does something stupid. So I think that would be my contribution.
Yeah, I think you're right in that sense that I have seen some companies that may be a little bit questionable in their technology or how they're pitching the tech. And again, I won't name names, but I think VCs are getting a little bit smarter to this, and their diligence phases are getting longer with the FTX and the Theranos and what else. But the space world is a little bit small. I think that the VCs are a very tight-knit group of people who stay in close communication. So we're very, I would say, kept abreast of if there's a red flag somewhere. But let's hope that doesn't take place.
Yeah, I agree with that. I did notice that in the last cycle, so to say, in 2021, you had a lot of people getting excited about space and kind of really, so to say, shooting from the hip, including people going direct who really didn't have any expertise in the space sector to do so. And so I guess I'm talking all of our books, right? Sort of, there's a reason specialist investors are around who can help, evaluate these companies, not only from a business sense, but definitely also from a technical point of view, because it is rocket science. We can actually say that here. Okay, so those are the risks. So interestingly, all three of us have talked really quite excitedly about what's going on in the US, with the new administration and so forth. But funnily enough, as I mentioned before, we all met a few days ago in Singapore, and we're all sort of perennial world travelers, following the space events and what's going on around the world in space. I mean, is there anything you guys want to point out about other regions of the world, things which may be exciting there to watch?
Since I'm based in Singapore, yes, I mean, and you guys both came from the US to Singapore to visit. I think this is our own region is, I mean, good to see that ecosystem is developing here. Good to see that more companies wants to come and consider, opening branches, or just kind of considering how they can become part of some of the grant systems or just programs in the ecosystem. There's a big event in Singapore in February, which called GSTCE, which now also kind of growing into Space Week of Singapore, and is kind of like, bringing Asian ecosystem together. But also you have a lot of people from the US and Europe coming to visit. And yeah, I just came back from Australia as well. As kind of good to see that, that ecosystem is kind of developing as well. And the next year, one of the biggest conferences, AAC, would be in Sydney as well. And I think, I'm definitely attending, but, you guys should consider as well, and everyone else as well. It's kind of good to consider what's happening in this part of the world. But yeah, that's kind of, I think, my point of view from Asia and APAC perspective.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with Alexandra, being exposed to the Southeast Asia ecosystem, there is activity starting to simmer, and it's exciting and interesting. I would like to see more participation from, LATAM countries, EU. You're close to the equator with, Central American countries, especially what was that the country that's basing its currency on Bitcoin, El Salvador. So I think there's a lot of opportunity. They're inviting, entrepreneurs. There could be some activity I hope to see coming from LATAM. It seems to be kind of a white zone right now, but would love to see activity and looking out for it as well.
Yeah, definitely. And from my side, I would add, and again, talking my book a little bit, we continue to be super excited about what's going on in India and the Indian space ecosystem. I'm just back from Mumbai a few days ago, visiting some of our startups there. And India is continuing full speed on its government space program. And India, as well as a few other countries outside the US. So I guess another reason we're so focused on the US is because there's just been so many, high profile and also high dollar amount government contracts coming out of the US. But we're really starting to see other sovereigns spending on space as well, on sovereign constellations and so forth. So India is one example. I'd also like to highlight Japan, where I was 3 times in 2024, and I expect and hope to go back many times in 2025 again. And so I hope this is going to benefit their local ecosystem, but to some extent also the global ecosystem.
Absolutely agree with that.
Okay, and maybe a follow-on question on that. So again, we've been talking a lot about the incoming US administration, and sort of the effect that will obviously have within the US. Do you guys see, because again, Alexandra, you're based in Singapore, Faraz, you're somewhere between the US and Singapore, and we're all traveling a lot to different places. Do you guys see any sort of effects the Trump administration, with its policies as they are known so far, could have on the rest of the world, how governments think about space?
I'll let Alexandra go first.
I think probably just because of the size of the industry and then like the level of development of the US market, most of the people see it as the market leading segment or industry, right? The market. So, and it's probably giving comfort to the rest of the world and to follow and see, okay, I've heard stories about after Trump election and announcement about Elon and Jared, people tripling the checks for the funds and deals are getting stronger and people want to kind of have more confidence in the industry now in space. So definitely, hopefully very positive trend here. I mean, for everyone, obviously the Artemis program is global, but still it's this big influence from NASA, and I think a lot of countries, especially countries in Asia, wants to be involved and wants to be part of this. And so it's good to see that hopefully now it will be a bit more commercial, a bit more structured, a bit more friendly for commercial entities. Hopefully we'll see some restructuring or optimization next couple of years. So, and I think that will be a positive effect as well for other participating members. And for me, I only see this as a positive effect from our perspective.
I see this as a interesting point in time. You have the FAA that oftentimes gave Elon a very hard time. Varda had a difficult time with the FAA. So I think having Elon in the Department of Government Efficiency and being close to the president is going to really allow for less friction, you would say, for the space companies, for what we need. And I had a conversation, with the Space Force General about, their needs are rapid launch, rapid reentry, but then the FAA always gets in the way. So I think the first thing we're going to see is a lot of disruption at the FAA level. And I think that's going to affect everybody globally. The other side to that coin might be that if there are, certain companies that look at as threats that, to the US, that there may be more consequences to pay there. So those are the two sides of coins.
Yeah, I'd agree to that. I'd add, and I'm speaking as a European here, who's sort of quite often cynical about developments in Europe. I noticed the obviously continuing strong intertwining of space and the defense sector, and I think that's, I don't know, you guys think, I think that's only going to get stronger, right? We now have Anduril clearly entering into the space sector as well. And, given some of the things that President Trump has said about NATO and various member states' contributions, I guess there's a chance that this may propel, in the best case scenario, some non-US countries who are, let's put it mildly, in my opinion, not spending enough on space and defense to spend more on space and defense, which again would be a positive for our industry.
Absolutely.
Okay, let me ask you a fun question. So, we kind of talked about a lot of the things which are very well known that are likely to happen in 2025, like Starship and so forth. Is there something that, so to say, people don't have on their 2025 space bingo cards that you think that maybe should be somewhere there? And you can go as crazy as you want there. But it has to be significant, right? It couldn't be like a low probability event, but sort of not impossible to happen. But if it happens, it would be significant.
Look, Varda's redoing a lot of drugs in space. I think that's going to be a huge opportunity. Could it be that we bring back a portfolio of medication that could be life-changing? Possible. And I think that might not be in the cards. I'm very optimistic about this new era of pharmaceutical, technology that's going to be emerging from space. And we'll only know once we get out there and actually do this. But I think, kind of like the hope that I have is maybe we can cure certain types of cancers with drugs that didn't pass before. And I think that would be a great outcome. So those are my fingers crossed for Varda's next few missions.
I think not sure about like unexpected or low probability events, but probably I just kind of looking what's happening in other industries, right? So I'm closely watching advanced materials and future of compute industries as well. And I think we should not forget that these two industries also affecting what's happening in space. And if you think, for example, everyone wants to have more compute, everyone wants to have better chips, everyone wants to do more edge computing, use AI. And I think this is only going to increase here on Earth also, but in space. So that's why I think sometimes we forget about, the whole, area of new startups doing edge computing and AI processing and data centers and all of this. I would be definitely watching it next year and kind of closely monitoring. And also advanced materials, like forget about AI, advanced materials and what's happening, lots of labs around the world doing research and trying to come up with better, like, smart or intelligent materials. But, there's a lot of opportunities for us to do it in space as well, using like deep vacuum, zero gravity and all other extreme conditions which we have. I know everyone is watching pharmaceutical industry, everyone is thinking about semiconductors and so on. But I think this is an area which we should probably also look at and kind of monitor what will happen in the next couple of years.
I love that both of you basically touched on the potential of in-space manufacturing, which, other than people who are really close to that, I hazard to say it's still seen as extremely futuristic and probably quite a few years out and so forth. And of course, I'm talking my book here. I'm very much aligned with you guys that I think that is going to start to happen in a commercial way, especially as we see some of the commercial platforms like Vada, but also Vast and others coming online.
Yeah.
And I think what you were implicitly referring to, Alexandra, is also really interesting that so it's not only commercial production, we also continue to conduct more and more experiments. And again, this is facilitated by having more platforms and just more capacity to do that. And arguably the gravity variable, so to say, is the one we've least experimented with, like science in general. So who knows what we may find. So this is really, really exciting. So for myself, I don't know, I try to think long and hard about this, what people don't have in their 2025 bingo cards. And I came up with some sort of like lame generalist answer and one that's completely nuts. So the first one would be, I think, I really believe in the creativity of entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs are awesome. They just come up with stuff that I'm not smart enough to do. And there's always someone who starts doing it, right? Like people starting Vada and companies like this. And so now with everything that's going on with Starship and this becoming more and more visible, we might just like suddenly get announcements of really funky companies coming out of stealth that we can't even imagine yet, but that really take advantage of these new capabilities. And I can't tell you exactly what, otherwise, I would try to find it and invest in it already. But, I did note, for example, during 2024, we had things coming out of stealth like Baiju Bat's Etherflux, right, with LEO-based, space-based solar power. I think super interesting, right? And that goes a little bit in this direction, but we may see stuff that's even more ambitious. And maybe like Alexandra, you mentioned AI and computing. Maybe it's something that's at the intersection of AI and computing and space, maybe even quantum computing, who knows? So that's the first one. And then my second answer, for which I will get ridiculed, of course, is I think perennially one answer to this question has to be first contact. So we'll actually find.
Well, we've been seeing all sorts of drones and things flying around that people can't identify. How funny would it be? But if that type of encounter happened, we could look forward to it. That all wars would end.
What would happen? You think? Okay, let's assume it's not like the War of the World or Independence Day scenario where they just immediately kill all of us. Let's say it's like semi-friendly. What would happen?
Yeah, I think it would turn faith on its head, right? Because we all our faiths are Earth-based faith. They're going to tell us an entirely new worldview, what faith is and what humanity is and what life is like. And like I said, I think that could end all wars because most wars happen in the name of faith. But yeah, really interesting that you mentioned that. I always kind of have that, but I also don't mention it. It's too crazy out there idea. But you would think that a civilization that could reach the Earth is also intelligent enough not to disrupt or disturb the things that are happening here until they feel that we're ready for such a thing. So I don't know.
Prime directive, Star Trek.
Yeah,
don't interfere.
Exactly. Don't interfere. Yeah, I was a huge Star Trek fan. I read all the novels, watched all the movies, so it resonates.
Alexandra, anything comes to your mind you want to do with?
No, I guess it's like it's just for me effect, right? How it's called is like, that's like, if it's more advanced civilizations, yes, they probably just watch NASA monitoring and like secretly laughing about our small steps. But yeah, maybe one of the drones is it's not ours.
Go guys, I thought one of you would mention, but what I think is like we would try to go as venture capitalists, try to go like negotiate with those guys and license some of their advanced tech.
Can I figure out how your anti-gravity works, please?
Yeah, exactly. Anyway,
we've been trying to figure that one out for a long time. Or like a fusion reactor or some kind of energy source that's like a size of a battery that can power everything. Who knows?
Okay, let's close the bracket on the sort of like crazier what's not on the 2025 bingo card. And let's finish up maybe one line from all of us. What do you wish for the space sector in 2025?
I wish for it to continue growing, for great companies to continue to execute at the rapid pace they have been, to take advantage of the next 4 years that Donald Trump is in office, with kind of Elon Musk very close to that. I think we have a lot of opportunity to compress in those 48 months, but at the same time, it's very exciting to get those people to go out and build. So I hope that we see more people coming out of stealth, building, raising capital, taking advantage of the new capital that's coming on market, and becoming part of the broader ecosystem. So I hope that Baiju Bot goes out and raises public capital too to get people excited about his company. I'm very excited about it. And of course, like Alexandra said, there's like, onboard compute, and, we made an investment in that area too. So we're very much bullish on, moving some of the way the data is crunched up into orbit. Yeah, I'm excited about VLEO operations that Albedo is launching for the first time sometime in February or March, which is going to be something, entirely new. There's a lot to look forward to. And I think that anything in parallel is going to, or anything close to SpaceX world, which is space, is going to benefit from all this activity.
I think when we try to like plan the portfolio and general investment strategy for like next couple of years, you like in 4 years we might have people working on the moon already, and maybe we'll reach Mars by that time. Like robots will be like from Starship coming out and bringing regolith back to Earth, right? The world is changing so fast. It's very difficult for us to kind of sit today and imagine this. And this is not, I'm not talking about 10 years, I'm talking about a couple of years, right? So that's exciting. It's fast, like rapidly developing, and it's great. I think I just wish we had a bit more international collaboration, more openness. Healthy competition is great, but kind of also I think that the exchange of talent, exchange of ideas, and I think sometimes it feels like it's happening a bit in silos, but I think it's good. I wish we had more of this, and I would like to see more of this in 2025. I know a lot of organizations trying to encourage that, and it's good to see this initiative. So that's my wish for 2025 for all of us.
Well, we have this thing called ITAR in the United States that makes it a little bit hard for that collaboration to take place all the time, but
but it's also changing. It's also changing. So hopefully for the best.
And it's good to see the companies from overseas coming over and starting up their other segments with ITAR. So some sort of collaboration is great. Yeah,
that's probably, in my humble opinion, going to be a reality, all of this, unless the aliens show up and force us. We talked about this already. So I'll add my own personal wish. So, I notice that if we really want a commercial space economy to happen, right, we can't just sell to the US government or the Japanese government or the Indian government. We really need like the really big sectors on Earth to be excited about and start being customers of what's happening in space, like the stuff we can produce in space. So my personal wish is that, and I will do as much as is my power myself possible, is to drag in big Earth-based, non-aerospace companies and sector, educate them about space, get them excited about space, explain what space can do for them, how we can create value together. And I'm sure you guys agree with that. That's obviously clearly also important for some of Alexandra's portfolio companies. So I hope we can all work on that together.
Absolutely.
Okay, guys, thank you so much for taking the time doing this on the 23rd of December, and happy holidays to you and to all of our listeners.
Thank you so much, Raphael. It's been a pleasure being here.
Thank you for having us. Thank you.